So it's Christmas Day in the larger world. At Sravasti Abbey, let's read Shantideva Day. Some years ago, I don't know how many years we've done this now. 6? 2009. A man in Italy sent us an offering and said, I'm making this offering with the request that the residents of Sravasti Abbey will recite Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life on Christmas Day. And so it's become a tradition. It's something that we do every year. It's a beautiful way to celebrate this day. Although most of us here are Buddhists, most of us here also grew up in a Christian culture. And so there is, we were talking a little bit this morning about how we kind of endow or imbue or impute the meaning on the day. And we can bring to this celebration around the world, which for me is very much, as I said this morning in our motivation, very, very much symbolic of how human beings long for happiness. Christmas really embodies that for me, and how we also acknowledge within ourselves our innate goodness that we long to manifest. I really believe that's true of human beings. And so what more magnificent way to celebrate human beings longing for happiness and extrapolate that to all sentient beings longing for happiness, and also to acknowledge a possibility for our goodness to be cultivated to its maximum by celebrating the cultivation of bodhicitta and reading about the paths to develop it and grow it, to become Buddhas so that we can be of benefit to all living beings. So this Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life has an interesting story of its origin. It's quite lovely. Shantideva, like the Buddha, was born as a prince, they say. So this was 8th century India, so the details historically, his birth certificate doesn't exist anymore, if it ever did. But that's the story, is that he was born to a royal family and, like the Buddha, was destined to take his father's kingdom. But in his dreams, Tara came, Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, came and said, don't do this. This will not be good for you or for sentient beings. And so he didn't. He renounced his kingdom and went to meditate for a long, long time in a cave and really apparently developed his meditation skills quite remarkably. When he left the cave, I think that's when he started to get direct, like Lama Tsongkhapa, to get direct transmission from the Buddha of wisdom, Manjushri, as his guide. So for a while he stayed in the secular world and was a minister to another king, and that didn't work out so well. He ended up going to the great university, Nalanda University in India, ordained as a monk and became a student there, but very low-key, very humble, you might say, to the point that the monastics of that university really didn't know anything about him. Their their strong opinion of this person was that he only ate, slept, and defecated. That's all they knew about him. And of course, there were a lot of opinions, you might say, judgments about such a person taking up the space in the great Nalanda University. So in order to humiliate him, they invited him to give a teaching. And he apparently reluctantly, as the story goes, accepted this wish. And of course, they thought they would just nail him because clearly he was a useless person. An idiot, maybe, who knows. So he took the seat and he said, would you like to have something more traditional or would you like something new or fresh? And they said, oh, please give us something fresh. And so he began to recite this text, just to recite it from memory, verse by verse by verse by verse, outlining step by step by step, praising the awakening mind of bodhicitta, outlining the steps until they say, the story goes, that when he reached the chapter on teaching about wisdom, on emptiness, that he rose into the air and eventually even disappeared as his voice continued to teach the text. And then he disappeared. He didn't come back. They actually went looking for him, found him months later, because now they think, oh, he's a great teacher. They found him in the south of India, but he wasn't particularly willing to come back. So he had a few occasions of disappearance throughout the rest of his life, as the stories go. But this particular text, there are 2 or 3, I can't remember now, extant texts. But this one has been a core part of the Tibetan system as well as Indian Buddhism, and cited, recorded, and it's just packed with stuff. And so it's a pleasure to continually acquaint ourselves with the whole text as a whole. We may study it verse by verse, but like once a year we look at the whole thing and get the gestalt of this teaching. And so I only want to read just a few verses and then do a little bit of a dedication. And once again, I've marked my place. Yeah. So this very famous verse 5, so much kind of depicts where we are in the world every day. Just as lightning illuminates the darkness of a cloudy light for an instant, in the same way, by the power of the Buddha, occasionally people's minds are momentarily inclined towards merit. Thus virtue is perpetually ever so feeble, while the power of vice is great and extremely dreadful. If there were no spirit of perfect awakening, what other virtue could ever overcome it? But just as a blind man might find a jewel amongst heaps of rubbish, so the spirit of awakening has somehow arisen in me. It is the elixir of life produced to vanquish death in the world. It is an inexhaustible treasure eliminating the poverty of the world. It is the supreme medicine that alleviates the illness of the world. It is the tree of rest for beings exhausted from wandering on the pathways of mundane existence. It is the universal bridge for all travelers on their crossing over miserable states of existence. It is the rising moon of the mind that soothes the mental afflictions of the world. Today I invite the world to Buddhahood and to temporal happiness. May the gods and asuras and others rejoice in the presence of all the protectors. So may we hold this aspiration today and every day, in this life and all future lives. And I wanted to go back to Zopa Rinpoche's advice that he gave just about a month ago and dedicate all the merit that is generated today from the recitation of this text here. Dedicate all the merit that is generated today by people everywhere, whatever way they celebrate virtue arising in whatever way. And pray that loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta be generated in the heart of all government people in the United States and in every government in the world. That loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta be generated in the hearts of the people in every country in the world, so that the world can enjoy perfect peace and happiness. We dedicate all the merit to pacify war, famine, disease, economic problems, and the dangers of fire, wind, water, earthquakes, and tsunamis here and in all of the world. May these things never happen. May there be perfect peace. And Zopa Rinpoche said, prayer has power since everything is created by the mind. Everything comes from the mind. And so by the extraordinary fortune of having met the spirit of awakening, this power of bodhicitta, we can dedicate the power of our minds to cultivating this peace in ourselves and peace in the world. And in so doing, everything we do then has an effect. Everything we do contributes to the conditions for this prayer of aspiration to be fulfilled. So, may we do it joyfully, and may we be able to liberate all living beings.